Hello, welcome to today's lecture. We will continue down our path on learning APIs. And since we learned the position of the API, today we will learn about the anatomy of an API call. So let's get to it. So last time we talked about the position, and today we will dig into the anatomy. So let's start with that. As you know, they are, or as you maybe don't know, there exists different types of APIs. So REST API is the most popular one, the most popular type of the APIs. Then we have the old one that was the standard long time ago, that is the SOAP API. And we have a few newer ones that are actually GraphQL, and it's beginning to be quite popular actually. We will talk about that part later on, maybe in the end of this course. And we have some others that are kind of APIs that are webhooks, and the newer ones, gRPC, that use different type of protocols. But we will only focus on RESTful APIs since those are the most popular ones, and probably if you're a developer, you already met or are familiar with building RESTful APIs. And if you're starting, then really nice for you. You will get to learn RESTful APIs with us so that you can use this knowledge and experience and implement it in real world scenarios once you get a job, or even if you're a student, start apprenticeship. So you will see. Yes, so let's go here where we left off the last time. So you are familiar with this type of visual aid. So we will focus today on this part. So we talked about the API last time at position, and right now, as I mentioned, there exists a different types of APIs, but we will focus on the RESTful ones. And the RESTful ones are pretty easy. You already know them. If you did something related to programming before, you will definitely know that everything we do is create, read, update, delete, right? So create, read, update, and delete. So everything that we are going to try to do with data, right? Everything is going to be create, read, write, update, delete. And that's how the HTTP and HTTP methods are as well in the RESTful APIs. But they have different verbs. So the read ones have a get. So if you want to get something from the database, try to read some data, you will send the HTTP GET request. So that's for reading. The next one is post. Post is for creating. So if we want to create something, for example, we want to create a user, or we want to register a user, we want to create a book, create an author, whichever business model or business logic that you have, if you want to create something, you will use an HTTP post request, right? And then we have three more that are patch and put. And the main difference between patch and put, and I will again point out that patch and put are the update ones. So if you want to update something, you will use patch and put. And the difference between patch and put is that the patch one is used only when we want to update a certain type or certain attribute inside of our object or inside of our row in our database, right? Inside of our collection. So for example, if we have a user in our database, so oftentimes we will have what? We will have first name, last name, email address, password, image, and a lot of different stuff, right? So when we update that user, we say that maybe I just want to update the first name. So instead of getting from the database the entire object and updating all of the stuff, or even if I want to update the entire user, I don't need all of the other attributes, right? I only need the one that I'm going to update. And that's why patch is used. So patch updates one or a certain amount of uh, attributes that you want to update. So only those attributes that you have chosen that you want to change, we update those. So let us write that. So is used to update only certain attributes of the model. And I like to write model here because we have models in the database, right? And we have models as our classes. So book class is a model, author class is a model, and different variants. And you can maybe guess what pat does. Put it updates the entire object. So it updates all of the attributes. Of course, if you don't have any, it will maybe have empty strings or something like that. Then we have to be careful not to override those attributes. And then we have those if statements and switch cases that if we have some value in our object that we want to update, then we update it. Otherwise, we ignore the stuff that we don't want to update. And that's why put, if you want to do a put, it will be a little bit more code than only patch. So with patch, you only update those parts of the object or of the model that you want to update. But pat, it updates the entire object. So that's the main difference between the two of them, and patch is relatively faster. And so those are the 4 ones, and the last one that we have is the delete HTTP pull request. HTTP request. So delete, if we want to delete something from the database or from our server, we use a delete HTTP request. And that is all there is to it. So get, post, put and patch, and delete. So those are the ones that you are going to use every single time, or most of the time, right? So that is the HTTP methods, how the entire API request is formatted, as well as response is 4 parts. So only 4 parts to the entire anatomy of the HTTP request. So let us get to it. First part. So let's do it like this. API request. So, or maybe we can do it like this. It is going to be built out of 4 parts. The first part is the URL, or if we want to dig deeper, an endpoint. So let's talk about that. If we navigate here, for example, to google.com, so google.com, this https:/www.google.com is a URL, right? So anything that exists here that you write, like YouTube and chat and GitHub and whatever, it's a URL. And oftentimes it's an API endpoint. And what it does is that it's listening. So this URL is actually a server. So if we go back, all of our URLs and endpoints, they're going to exist in our API server. So don't be confused by that. We will cover this directly in the next lecture. But what I'm trying to do is just explain the URL or endpoint aspect. So this here is a URL. When I press enter, I get the response. So I send a get request when I press enter. So I write the URL here and I press enter. In that way, I send the HTTP GET request to see what does exist in this URL. So what can I find in this URL when I navigate to it? And while navigating, I actually do a GET HTTP request. So that's what I'm doing. And when I press enter, I send a GET request, and what I get back as a response, because if we go back, everything on the internet is request and response. As a response, I get this nice looking user interface with the logo and the input field and these two buttons and this stuff here. So that's what I get as a response. But the important thing is that it comes, the first step is the URL. So I have to navigate to somewhere, right? So I have to go to some page or to some URL in order to request something. So for example, if I want to go to a Nike store, I go to Nike.com, right? So if you want to order something, if you want to get something, you have to go somewhere, right? So where we're going, we're navigating to a URL. Yes. So that's the first important thing, URL, or as we're going to call them once we start developing our APIs, those are going to be called endpoints. So as we said, the first part is going to be a URL. So let me show you actually what happens behind the scenes. So we will learn this tool as well. I will do a couple of videos on this tool that is called Postman. So if we go to get requests, or we don't need to go here. So if I open a new request here, I send a get request to, if we go to google.com, so I paste the URL here and I send a get request. So here, this is a tool. The Postman is a tool that helps us investigate, test, and inspect our API calls or API endpoints or the entire APIs. So right here, I can send different kind of requests, and I want to send only a get request to google.com. And if I send it, you will see here that as a body, I get the HTML response. HTML is code that we use in browsers. So if I go preview, I will see that this is actually without the images. I don't get the image rendered here. You can see that I get the basically what I get here in the Google, right? So I get the icon, I have the input field, the two buttons. So that's the same here. So that's the response, but it's the same as when I sent basically a totally raw HTTP request here in this program, in this tool. So it's the same thing, the same behavior as I did here when I navigate to the google.com and URL, right? So that was the first part. The second part we already know. We have learned them right now, and those are the HTTP methods. So HTTP methods were, as we have them here, get, post, patch and put, and delete, right? The other thing that we have, or the third thing inside every, or inside the anatomy of the API pull request is something that is called headers. And so basically what headers are, or we can explain them as key value pairs. Like you definitely learn JSON. You definitely know what key value pairs are. So what headers are key value pairs, instructions that tell our server or our API how it needs to process this request. So basically, key value pairs that carry some kind of metadata and instructions on how it should process this request. And basically, the most basic thing that we're gonna use are two parts. First part is the content type. So when we send a HTTP request to our API, we need in our headers to specify what kind of data we are sending. And oftentimes it will be a JSON format, right? So we want to send key value pairs, but it can maybe be so that we are sending files. We want to upload files or similar. So that's the first part. The second part in our headers is oftentimes going to be authorization tokens, right? So as we talked before, we want to protect our data in some way, right? So we will not allow a random user just to stroll into our application, right? We would like only logged and registered users to be able to do that, to do something on our website, right? So in that case, we will have something, or we will say that whoever wants to integrate or interact with our website, they, each time they send a get, not a get, but whichever HTTP request they want, they need to have an authorization token in their headers, that in this part. So they will need to specify and tokens. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that it's something special. It's only like a badge or an ID or something similar that says, hey, I'm allowed to be here and I'm allowed to do these things. That's basically what a token is. So I'm a logged in user, I'm a registered user, or I'm a premium user, or whatever. I'm here and I'm allowed to do these things. That's it. So that's what the token is. So what headers, apart from other stuff, do is that we're going to use them for content type to specify and instruct which kind of data we are sending, and authorization tokens. So that's two main things that we're going to do with our headers. And at the end, maybe even the most important one is going to be the body. And body of the request is pretty easy. It's pretty easy to understand. What the body is the data that we are sending to our API that we want to do something with. For example, saving the database or similar. So when I'm trying to log in, when I'm trying to register, to create a new user, to create a new to-do, or create a new post or whatever, I will try, while using HTTP post method, right, to send some data. And that data is going to exist in the body. So in the body of this request, we are going to send the data that we want in order to save it to the database or do something with it in our application. So that's the body part. And how it looks, I can show you here. So for example, if we go here and we do a post request, so here I will create a post. So I do a post method and navigate. I can maybe zoom in a little bit if I can. Post request to this URL, and what I'm sending, if you see here in the body, I'm sending a JSON file, and we will always work with JSONs when it comes to sending, as API often expects, as well as response. We will oftentimes, or maybe even always, send on the JSON. So we specify a post here with title, body, and user ID, and we send this in the body of our HTTP request. So when we send it here, for example, this is a dummy API, so a fake API. If I send it, I get a response that is my titles and body with the user ID and the ID that this post has that has been newly created. So this we will cover both the Postman tool later on and the actual sending and getting back the responses. So important for you to know that the last part of the anatomy of the API request is the body. And in the body, we send the data that we want to do something with to our application. Okay? Nice. So that's all there is when it comes to requests. When it comes to responses, so let's copy this. When it comes to API response, then we have three parts. We have the status code, we have headers again, and then we have the body. So not a big difference, a part of this little thing that is a status code. So status code is basically saying was the HTTP request successful, and did something happen, and if it did, what did happen. And you basically have I don't know, maybe there are between 15 to 20. I don't really know exactly how many HTTP status code there is, but oftentimes you will have 200, or maybe let me find a list. So if we API status codes, if we maybe look at this, yeah. So here's a list. Maybe there are a little bit more, but they are pretty detailed, so we don't need to know about each of them. But oftentimes you will have 200, and that's when everything is okay. So we can, as he did here, or this website as they did it, 200, or when if it starts with a 2, that means that it is a successful one. 300, those are for the redirection. 400, that's that something is our side. So as you see, bad request. And bad request, it can mean that we didn't set the data appropriately. So maybe we lack some fields, or if maybe the telephone number should be numbers and we wrote text, then of course it's going to be a bad request and stuff like that. And unauthorized payment required and stuff like that. So that's the 400s, or beginning with 4. That means that it's something or our part. So that's why it says client error. We are the clients. 500, then that's the server error. So something with our application, if it begins with 5. And oftentimes you will see this one, 500, internal server error. So that means that we try to do something and our application, something went wrong. We maybe forgot a use case, we forgot to catch an error somewhere, and this is the status code that's going to be returned in the API. So there maybe are, let's see, 30, 35, 40 maybe, but you will probably use only 10 of them, or even get to experience only 10 of them if you don't experiment a lot. So these are the status codes, and they are always going to be there when you send an API request. So those are the status codes in the response. Later we have the headers with, again, certain type of information that is valuable for us. So response headers can be also like content type and content length, or cookies or cache, or something similar to ones that we have when we send them. And of course, the most important one is the body, right? Because if we send something, if we, for example, ordered an item, or want to register a user, we want to know when we send a request, we want to get a response of what happened. Is the user successfully registered? Did something wrong happen? If it did, then what? So that we know that we can fix our error. So when it comes to sending requests and responses, and that we will learn as well once we start building our APIs, we want to do everything from the user perspective, and make the responses user friendly. So if everything went right, nice, then we say that everything went right. If something went wrong, then what? Is it relative to the user? Nice, then we inform the user. Is it relative to us as developers? Okay, then we keep it and refactor the code and maybe do something else. But we will always try when it comes to API, because as well, if we look at this visual aid again, what we're trying to do and what the position and the role of the API is the receptionist, right? So they need to know about stuff, and as well inform the customers or users about what is happening with the request and response, right? So that, ladies and gentlemen, is basically the anatomy of the API request and response. So we learned about the structure. So API request has its URL, endpoints. That's the first one. That's where we navigate. Where do we want to send our request to? Is it Nike Store? Is it the Google? Is it something else? Nice. Then we have which method. Do we want to create something? Do we only want to read something? Do we want to update or delete? Nice. Then we have the headers, and the two most important that I mentioned was content type, what type of content are we sending, and the authorization tokens to show if we are the authorized personnel or the authorized person that does something or can do something on that website. And of course, body oftentimes is if we want to send something, and oftentimes important to mention that you will send the body with post, patch, and put. So the body in the HTTP request is going to exist only with post, patch, and put. Why? Because HTTP GET requests, they ignore the body. Even if you send the body with a GET request, it will ignore it and delete as well. So that's important to know. So body is used only for post, patch, and put. Why? Because if we look at it from the logical side or from the from that side, then you know that if we want to create something, if we want to register a user, create a book, create author, create a bank account, create whatever, you will send the data on, okay, what's the username, what's the book name, the book title, and stuff like that, right? So you want to send the data. You're sending data as well as you want to update something, right? So you want to update it with some kind of data. So you're sending data, and that's why you need the body of the HTTP request. And for the response, the first thing, we always look at the status code. Is it good? Is it bad? What's happening? And of course, now we even have a list to compare or to see and to know exactly what's happening with our request. We have headers that have some information. And then the most important part, we have the body that is carrying our response from the database or from the API server itself. Nice. So this was the anatomy of the API requests and responses. So in the next one, we are going to start building our first ASP.NET Core Web API. And before we actually do any create, read, update, and deletes, we are first going to get to know ourselves with the environment, that is Visual Studio and ASP.NET Core Web API, and to possibly do a comparison between what we did up till now, that was console applications, and compare it with what we have now, sorry for the Swinglish, what we have now in our Solution Explorer in Visual Studio. So that's going to be next lecture, getting to know the ASP.NET Core Web API file hierarchy, or the default stuff that comes with the creation of that project. So thank you for today, and I see you in the next one.